So now let's study the outcome loss and the output gap Phillips curve. Before we study this, let's look at the regular Phillips curve. Let's draw the graphs. When we show the regular Phillips curve, we put the inflation rate pi on the vertical axis, unemployment rate U on the horizontal axis. And the Phillips curve will be the downward sloping curve. So it describes the negative relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate in the short run. Let's write out this. So if unemployment rate U goes up, according to the Phillips curve we learned previously, unemployment rate dropped. Inflation rate dropped. So that's a Phillips curve. On the other hand, we know if the unemployment rate increased, normally it means economy is not good. Economy is in a recession. So the output level, real GDP, will be low. If real GDP low, we know the output gap, we use the Y bar, will be low. So that's actually the outcomes loss. So now let's look at the inflation rate and the output gap. So combine the Phillips curve and the outcomes loss together, we will find out when the inflation rate is low, the output gap will be low. On the other hand, if the unemployment rate goes down, the inflation rate will be up. Again, that's a negative relationship predicted by Phillips curve. When the unemployment rate is low, the economy normally is good. So GDP is increasing. So output level is high and the output gap, Y bar, will be high. That's according to the outcomes loss. Let's see what happened to the inflation rate and the output here. So when the inflation rate is high, using both the Phillips curve and outcome law, we know the output gap will be high too. So what's the relationship exists between the inflation rate and the potential GDP or output gap? And we can find here the conclusion is that's a positive relationship between the inflation and output gap, Y bar. So output gap version of the Phillips curve, we know we will use the new graph here. We call this output gap Phillips curve. And we still put the inflation rate pi here. But remember, for the output gap version of the Phillips curve, we put the output gap Y bar here. And we already know that a positive relationship exists between the inflation rate and the output gap. If two variables has the positive relationship, the line will be upward sloping curve. So that's what we say, the output gap Phillips curve. And if we add one more curve here, the potential GDP. When the potential GDP equals the real GDP, the output gap Y bar is 0. You remember, the Y bar output gap is defined as real GDP Y minus potential GDP YP. So if real GDP Y equal potential GDP YP here, and we can know the output gap is 0. So that's a vertical curve. So this vertical curve and the output gap version of the Phillips curve determine the inflation rate at y1 here. If there's an expected increase in the inflation rate, so if expected inflation rate goes up, or if there's a negative supply shock, so what is the negative supply shock? For example, the oil price increase a lot, and we know oil is the important input to produce many goods and services. If oil price goes up, it will push up the average price level, which lead to the higher level of the inflation. So that is the typical negative supply shock, because the oil price increase will lead to the higher the input cost. So both higher expected inflation rate and the negative supply shock will push up the Phillips curve to the Phillips curve 1 here. With this, we can know the average inflation rate, average price level goes up, inflation rate will jump up from the pi 1 to pi 2 here. Similarly, if the expected inflation rate is going down, or if there's positive supply shock, and you can imagine positive supply shock means the input cost reduced. Suppose oil price goes down. It's good news to many business, because they can cut their costs with the lower level of the oil price. So it will shift the Phillips curve downward to the Phillips curve 2. And with this, you can see the inflation rate will drop from the pi 1 to pi 3. And some of you may ask the question, why the output gap here will remain the same? And remember, when we show the output gap here, equal real GDP equal potential GDP, change of the price cannot affect the potential GDP. And we know this from the previous chapter. Potential GDP is determined by labor, land, and the capital. Those are the real goods. Real economic variable will not affected by the nominal goods like inflation rate and the price. So the potential GDP still remain at the same level. And the positive or negative change of the inflation rate or positive or negative supply shock will only shift the output gap Phillips curve upward or downward, and it will not affect the GDP in the long run.